On a freezing Chicago night, a simple act of kindness would unravel a 30-year mystery. When basketball legend Michael Jordan gave his coat to a shivering homeless girl outside a convenience store, he didn't know he was about to find what his family had been searching for since before his first championship ring. He just knew something in her eyes seemed familiar. The Chicago wind howled through the streets like an angry wolf. Michael Jordan sat behind the wheel of his black Mercedes, tired after another long charity event. He'd signed hundreds of basketballs and jerseys for sick kids at the Children's Hospital, but something felt empty inside him tonight. Snow danced in his headlights as he drove through the quiet streets. The dashboard clock showed 11:43 p.m., and the temperature gauge read a bone-chilling 12 degrees. Michael turned up the heat and thought about heading home to his warm mansion. That's when he saw her. A small figure huddled against the wall of Sam's corner store, wearing only a thin jacket. Even from his car, Michael could see her shivering. She looked about 12 years old, with dark curly hair poking out from under a worn Cubs baseball cap. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd seen plenty of homeless people in Chicago, but something about this girl made his chest hurt. Maybe it was because she was so young, or maybe it was the way she tried to look brave, even though she was shaking from the cold. He pulled into the store's parking lot. "Hey there," he called softly, stepping out of his car. The girl's head snapped up, her body tensing like she might run. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Her eyes met his, and Michael felt a strange jolt. Those eyes, they reminded him of someone, but he couldn't remember who. They were deep brown with little flecks of gold. Just like the thought slipped away before he could grab it. "I'm fine, mister," the girl said, her teeth chattering. "Don't need anything." Michael smiled. He remembered being proud like that when he was young, never wanting to accept help. Without thinking twice, he took off his expensive cashmere coat. It was his favorite, a Christmas gift from his mother last year. "Take it," he said, holding it out. "Please." The girl stared at the coat, then at him. "Why?" "Because it's cold, and because somebody once told me that sometimes angels dress up like regular people to test our kindness." Michael grinned. "And I'd hate to fail an angel test." A tiny smile crept across her face. It transformed her whole appearance, making her look less like a scared street kid and more like. Michael's head started hurting as another almost memory slipped away. The girl reached out slowly and took the coat. It was huge on her, falling past her knees, but she wrapped it around herself like a blanket. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Sarah." "Nice to meet you, Sarah." Michael paused. If she knew who he was, it might change everything. "I'm just someone who doesn't like seeing kids being cold." Sarah nodded, pulling the coat tighter. Her eyes were getting heavy. Michael could tell she was exhausted. "Is there somewhere safe you can go?" he asked. "A shelter, maybe?" "Yeah, I know places." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. She wasn't going to tell him more. Michael wanted to help her, to take her somewhere warm, but he knew pushing too hard might scare her away. Still, he couldn't just leave her. "Listen," he said, pulling out his wallet. "Take this too." He handed her several 20s. "Get something hot to eat, okay?" Sarah's eyes widened at the money. "I can't." "You can, and you will," Michael said firmly. "Consider it a rental fee for the coat." That made her smile again, and there was that nagging feeling in Michael's mind. Why did her smile seem so familiar? "Stay safe, Sarah," he said, walking backward to his car. "Maybe I'll see you around." "Maybe," she answered, already looking warmer in the big coat. "Thank you, Angel." Michael drove home slowly, his thoughts spinning like the snowflakes outside. He couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, but he didn't know what. In his heated garage, he sat in his car for a long time, thinking about Sarah's eyes and smile. They tugged at his memory like an old photograph he couldn't quite place. His head started aching again as he tried to remember. Walking into his empty mansion, Michael passed the wall of family photos. He barely glanced at them anymore. They were just part of the background of his life. But tonight, something made him stop. There, in a faded picture from 30 years ago, was his family. His parents, himself as a toddler, and the baby. The sister he'd lost. The one who was stolen from the hospital before they even got to take her home. He stared at the only photo they had of her, taken by a nurse just hours before she disappeared. The baby had been too young to see her eye color clearly, but in the picture, she had a hint of a smile that made his chest tight. Michael's hands started shaking as his tired mind tried to connect dots that seemed impossible. "No," he told himself. "Don't go there. Don't get your hopes up again." They'd been through this too, many times over the years, thinking they'd found her, only to have their hearts broken again. But as he climbed the stairs to his bedroom, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's eyes, her smile, the way she looked so familiar, yet so strange. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as snow fell outside his window. The wind howled like it was trying to tell him something. And somewhere in the city, a girl was sleeping in his coat. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time Michael closed his eyes, he saw Sarah's face mixed with memories of his lost sister. It was probably nothing, he told himself. Just his tired mind playing tricks. Just another false hope in a lifetime of searching. But what if? The question followed him into his dreams, where a baby's cry mixed with the howling wind, and a pair of brown eyes with golden flecks watched him from the shadows. Michael woke up, gasping, his sheets tangled around him. The dream had felt so real. The baby's cry, those haunting eyes. Sunlight streamed through his window, but the memory of last night's encounter with Sarah still felt heavy in his chest. He reached for his phone and called the one person who would understand. "Mama?" he said when she answered. "I need to talk about her." His mother's breath caught on the other end of the line. She knew exactly who he meant. They hadn't talked about his sister in months, but the pain in her voice was still fresh. "What brought this on, Michael?" she asked softly. Michael closed his eyes, remembering how it all began. "I met someone last night who reminded me of everything, and I can't stop thinking about that day." The memories flooded back, as clear as if they'd happened yesterday instead of 30 years ago. He'd been just 2 years old when his baby sister was born. Michael remembered standing on his tiptoes by the hospital bed, peeking at the tiny bundle in his mother's arms. "Want to hold your sister?" his father had asked, lifting him up carefully. "My sister," little Michael had said proudly, looking down at the baby's face. Even then, he remembered those eyes, brown with tiny golden specks that seemed to sparkle. They named her Joy, because that's what she brought to their family. But their joy lasted less than 2 days. The nurse said she needed to check Joy's temperature, Michael's mother said now, her voice cracking over the phone. She took her from my arms and walked out. We never saw either of them again. Michael got out of bed and walked to his home office, where he kept the old newspaper clippings. The headlines screamed across decades. Newborn stolen from Chicago. Hospital. Jordan family offers reward for missing baby. 5 years later. The search for Joy. Jordan continues. The police tried everything, his mother continued, but the nurse used fake credentials. The security cameras weren't working that day. It was like she knew exactly how to disappear. Michael spread the articles across his desk. Each year on Joy's birthday, he'd done interviews, hoping to keep her story alive. When he became famous, he used his platform to search for her. But every lead turned cold. Every hope turned to dust. I remember when I made it to the NBA, Michael said. My first thought wasn't about the fame or money. I thought, now everyone will know my name. Now maybe someone will come forward about Joy. His mother was quiet for a moment. You never told me that before. I had this dream that she'd see me playing basketball on TV and somehow just know she was my sister. Michael laughed sadly. Sounds crazy now. Not crazy, his mother said. Hope isn't crazy, Michael. He thought about Sarah shivering in the cold last night. How many other lost girls were out there? How many families were missing pieces of their hearts? Something happened last night, Mama, Michael said slowly. I met this young girl. He told her about Sarah, about her eyes with the golden flecks, about the smile that seemed to reach into his memories. His mother listened without interrupting. Michael, she said finally, her voice careful. We've been through this before. Remember the girl in Detroit and the teenager in Atlanta? I know, Mama. I know. Michael rubbed his tired eyes. Each false lead had felt like losing Joy all over again. The investigation had consumed their family for years. His parents had spent their savings on private detectives. His father worked extra shifts to pay for age progression photos and newspaper ads. His mother quit her job to follow up on tips and leads. Michael remembered coming home from school to find his mother crying over baby clothes she couldn't bear to pack away. He remembered his father staying up late, making phone calls to hospitals across the country. The loss of Joy had carved a hole in their family that nothing could fill. Sometimes I wonder if she's happy, his mother whispered. Wherever she is. Does she have enough to eat? Is someone taking care of her? Does she feel loved? Michael thought about Sarah in his coat, alone in the cold Chicago night. Mama, what if? What if she's not okay? What if she needs us, and we just don't know it? That's what keeps me awake at night, his mother admitted. But we can't save every lost girl. Michael, we tried that before, remember? He did remember. For years after Joy's kidnapping, his parents had helped every homeless or troubled girl they could find, hoping each one might somehow lead them to their daughter. It had nearly broken them financially and emotionally. But Sarah's different, Michael insisted, though he couldn't explain why. There's something about her. Baby, I know you want to help her, his mother said gently. And you should. But don't confuse helping someone in need with finding joy. Your heart can't take another disappointment like that. Michael walked to his window, looking out at the snow-covered city. Somewhere out there, Sarah was wearing his coat. Somewhere out there, his sister was living a life they knew nothing about. I have to find her again, he said. Sarah, I mean. At least make sure she's safe. His mother sighed. Just be careful with your heart, Michael. And call me if you need me. After hanging up, Michael sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the old newspaper clippings. The baby in the hospital photo seemed to stare back at him with those memorable eyes, brown with golden flecks. He picked up his phone again and called his head of security. John, I need you to help me find someone. A homeless girl named Sarah, probably around 12 years old. She was at Sam's corner store last night. Of course, Mr. Jordan. Any other details? Michael hesitated, looking at the hospital photo of Joy. Yes, he said finally. She's wearing my coat. Outside his window, the snow had stopped falling, but the questions in his heart were just beginning to swirl. He knew his mother was right. He shouldn't get his hopes up. But as he got dressed to begin the search, he couldn't shake the feeling that finding Sarah might be the most important thing he'd ever done. Even if she wasn't Joy, even if this was just another dead end, he had to know. Because those eyes, that smile, they wouldn't let him rest until he found the truth. The streets looked different in daylight. Michael rode in the passenger seat of John's black SUV, scanning the sidewalks for any sign of his coat or Sarah's familiar face. His security teams had split up to cover more ground, but so far, no one had spotted her. The store owner says she comes by sometimes, John reported, turning onto another street. Usually in the evenings. He gives her hot chocolate when he can. Michael nodded, his throat tight. He'd driven past this store hundreds of times over the years, never knowing Sarah was here. Never knowing someone who might be... No, he couldn't think that way. Not yet. There's a shelter 3 blocks over, John said, interrupting Michael's thoughts. Want to try there? The shelter was a brick building with warm yellow lights in the windows. Inside, the smell of coffee and cooking oatmeal filled the air. A woman with kind eyes and gray hair met them at the desk. Sarah? She repeated when Michael asked. Yes, I know her. Sweet girl. But she hasn't been here in almost a week. Is that normal? Michael tried to keep his voice steady. For her to stay away so long? The woman, Ms. Betty, according to her name tag, hesitated. She comes and goes. More goes than comes lately. Some of our kids are like that. They've been hurt by adults so many times, they have trouble trusting. Michael's hands clenched in his pockets. The thought of Sarah being hurt made his chest burn with anger. What can you tell me about her? He asked. Mrs. Betty studied him carefully. Why are you looking for her? I gave her my coat last night. I just want to make sure she's okay. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. That was you? A young voice piped up from behind them. Michael turned to see a boy about Sarah's age, maybe a little older, watching them from a corner table. He had a bowl of oatmeal in front of him and a suspicious look in his eyes. Yeah, that was me. Michael walked over slowly and sat down across from the boy. I'm Michael. I know who you are, the boy said. Everyone knows Michael Jordan. I'm Marcus. Nice to meet you, Marcus. You know Sarah? Marcus stirred his oatmeal. Maybe. What's it to you? I told you. I want to make sure she's okay. She's fine, Marcus said quickly. She can take care of herself. But something in the boy's voice made Michael think that wasn't quite true. He leaned forward. Marcus, listen. I know what it's like to want to protect your friends, but if Sarah's in trouble, if she needs help... She's not in trouble, Marcus interrupted. She's just sick, okay? But she won't come to the shelter because last time they tried to call social services. Michael's heart jumped. Sick? How sick? Marcus shrugged, but his eyes were worried. Bad cough, fever maybe. She's staying at the old warehouse on Pine Street with some other kids. Can you show me? Marcus shook his head. No way. She'd never trust me again. What if I promised to help her? Michael pulled out his wallet and found a business card. Here's my number. If you talk to her, tell her the coat man wants to help. No social services, no police, just help. Marcus took the card slowly. Why do you care so much? Lots of kids out here need help. Michael thought about the newspaper clippings on his desk, about his mother's voice on the phone, about those eyes with golden flecks. "Because sometimes helping one person is where you have to start," he said. Marcus studied the card, then looked up at Michael. "The warehouse has a blue door. If you go after dark, she might be there. But don't tell her I told you." "I won't," Michael promised. He stood up and pulled out some money. "Get yourself something hot for lunch too, okay?" Outside, John was waiting. "Any luck?" "Pine Street," Michael said. "There's a warehouse with a blue door, but we wait until dark." The rest of the day crawled by. Michael canceled his meetings, ignored his phone, and drove around the city with John, learning Sarah's world. They found the diner where she sometimes washed dishes for food, the library where she went to stay warm, the park where she and other homeless kids hung out. Each place added another piece to the puzzle of her life, and each piece made Michael's heart ache more. If Sarah was joy, and that was still a big if, she'd been living like this while he had more money than he could spend. As the sun set, they parked near the warehouse. Michael clutched a bag filled with warm food, medicine, and clean clothes. His coat was in there too. He'd gone home and gotten another one just like it, in case she needed it. "You sure about this?" John asked. "These places can be dangerous after dark." But Michael was already getting out of the car. He'd waited 30 years to find his sister. If there was even a chance Sarah was joy, no warehouse in Chicago was going to stop him. The blue door was half hidden in shadows. Michael knocked softly. "Sarah?" he called. "It's me, from last night, the coat man." Silence answered him. He knocked again. "I brought food," he said, "and medicine. Marcus said you were sick." A shuffling sound came from inside, then a weak cough. The door creaked open just an inch. Sarah's face appeared in the gap, pale and sweaty. The coat, his coat, was wrapped tight around her thin shoulders. Her eyes, those haunting, familiar eyes, were glassy with fever. "You came back," she whispered. And in that moment, looking at her sick and scared but still fighting, Michael knew he'd never leave her alone again. Whether she was joy or not, she needed someone in her corner. "Yeah," he said softly. "I came back." Sarah's head felt like it was stuffed with cotton. The fever made everything fuzzy, but she knew she had to be careful. Nice people didn't usually stay nice for long. That's what 3 years on the streets had taught her. But something about the coat man was different. Maybe it was the way. He looked at her, like she mattered, like she wasn't just another homeless kid to feel sorry for. "You shouldn't have come," she said, trying to sound tough even though her chest hurt when she talked. "I told you I was fine." The man, she still didn't know his name, held up a bag. "Then I'll just leave this food and medicine here. Your choice if you want it." Sarah's stomach growled at the smell of hot soup. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, when Miss Betty had snuck her half a sandwich. The coat kept her warm, but it couldn't fill her empty stomach. She opened the door a little wider. The coat man smiled, but his eyes looked sad. Behind him stood another man, tall and serious in a black jacket. A bodyguard, maybe? Sarah had seen enough rich people in Chicago to know they usually had protection. "You're some kind of important person, aren't you?" she asked, studying the coat man's expensive clothes. "That's why you have a guard?" "Something like that," he said. "But right now, I'm just someone who wants to help. Can we come in? It's freezing out here." Sarah hesitated. The warehouse was her safe place, where she and other street kids came when the shelters were full or too dangerous. Letting adults in broke every rule they had, but her legs felt weak, and the soup smelled so good. "Just you," she said finally. "Not him." She nodded at the bodyguard. The coat man looked back at his guard. "John, wait in the car. I'll be fine." Inside, Sarah's flashlight cast strange shadows on the walls. Empty wooden crates made little rooms throughout the huge space. Her bedroom was in the corner. A pile of blankets, some books from the library, and a backpack with everything she owned. "Nice place," the coat man said, but not in the mean way most people would say it. He sounded like he meant it. Sarah sat on her blankets, pulling his coat tighter. "It's better than foster care." The man's face changed when she said that. "You ran away from foster parents?" Sarah nodded, then wished she hadn't as the room spun a little. They were bad people. Said they wanted a daughter, but really just wanted the money. She didn't tell him about the locked closet, or the days without food, or the bruises she had to hide at school. Some things were better kept quiet. The coat man set down his bag and pulled out a container of soup. "Here, chicken noodle. Good for colds." Sarah took it carefully, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "Why are you really here? Nobody just helps for no reason." "Maybe I see something special in you," he said. "Something familiar." Sarah spooned soup into her mouth, trying not to eat too fast even though she was starving. The coat man pulled out. "Some medicine next. Cough syrup and pills for fever." "I'm not taking those," she said quickly. "Pills aren't safe. They're still sealed." He showed her the safety packaging. "But it's your choice, like everything else." That surprised her. Adults usually tried to force her to do things for her own good. "You're different," she said, studying his face. Something about his eyes made her feel strange, like she'd seen them before. But that was impossible. "Sarah," he said softly, "can I ask you something? Do you remember anything about your birth parents?" The question made her stomach flip. "No. The foster. People said I was left at a hospital. Nobody wanted me." "I don't believe that," he said, his voice fierce. "I bet someone wanted you very much. Maybe they still do." Sarah's head hurt worse now, and not just from the fever. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't give me hope like that. Hope is dangerous out. Here." The coat man reached into his bag again and pulled out another coat, exactly like the one she was wearing. "I brought you a clean one," he said. "And some warm clothes too." Sarah touched the new coat. No one had ever given her new things before. The foster parents always gave her old clothes, hand-me-downs from their real kids. "I like this one better," she said, clutching his original coat. It makes me feel safe." Something flickered in the man's eyes. Was it tears? No. Must be the fever making her see things. A coughing fit hit her then, hard enough to make her whole body shake. The coat man moved closer, his hand hovering like he wanted to help, but wasn't sure how. "Sarah, please, let me take you to a doctor. No social services, I promise. Just someone to help you get better." She shook her head. Can't trust doctors. They ask too many questions." "Then trust me," he said. "I know we just met, but haven't you ever felt like some people are just meant to be in your life?" Sarah looked at him through fever-blurred eyes. The truth was, she did trust him, and that scared her more than any sickness. Because trust meant letting someone in, and letting someone in meant they could hurt you. But as another cough racked her body, she realized she might not have a choice. The fever was getting worse, and the warehouse was so cold. "Will you stay?" she asked in a small voice. "If I go to the doctor, will you stay with me?" The coat man's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I'll stay as long as you need me. I promise." Sarah closed her eyes, too tired to fight anymore. As she felt strong arms lift her gently, still wrapped in his coat, a memory flickered at the edge of her mind. Another pair of arms holding her, another voice making promises. But that was impossible. Nobody had ever wanted her before, right? The emergency room lights were too bright after the darkness of the warehouse. Michael carried Sarah through the sliding doors, her small body burning, with fever against his chest. She was still wrapped in his coat, clutching it even in her half-conscious state. "I need help," he called out. "She's burning up." Nurses rushed forward with a gurney. As they tried to take Sarah from his arms, she gripped his shirt. "Don't leave," she mumbled. "You promised." "I'm right here," Michael assured her. "I'm not going anywhere." A doctor appeared, Dr. Chen, according to her name tag. She took one look at Sarah and started giving orders to the nurses. "How long has she been sick?" she asked Michael. "I'm not sure." Her friend said she's had a cough for a while. "The fever's new, I think." Dr. Chen frowned as she listened to Sarah's chest with a stethoscope. "Sounds like pneumonia. We need to start antibiotics right away." "Are you her father?" Michael hesitated. "No, I found her on the street. She's homeless." The doctor's face changed. "Then we need to call social services. Hospital policy for minors." "Please," Michael said quickly. "Not yet. Let me make some calls first. I think she might be my sister." Dr. Chen looked skeptical but nodded. "You have 1 hour, but she needs treatment now." As they wheeled Sarah toward an exam room, a nurse tried to take the coat off her. "No!" Sarah's eyes flew open in panic. "My coat!" "Let her keep it," Michael said. "Please, it helps her feel safe." The nurse looked to Dr. Chen, who nodded. "For now, but we'll need to examine her properly soon." In the exam room, they hooked Sarah up to monitors. Her temperature was 104 degrees. An IV drip would help bring it down, they said. Michael held her hand as they inserted the needle, pretending not to notice when she squeezed his fingers hard. "Hurts," she whispered. "I know, kiddo, but it'll help you feel better." While the nurses worked, Michael studied Sarah's face. The fever had brought spots of color to her cheeks, making her look even more like the age progression photos of joy he'd seen over the years. But there was something else, something he hadn't noticed before. On Sarah's right hand, just below, her thumb was a small brown birthmark. Michael's heart stopped. Joy had had the exact same mark. It was in all her hospital records, one of the identifying features the police had used in their search. The mark was shaped like a tiny crescent moon, just like Sarah's. His hands shaking, Michael pulled out his phone and called his mother. "Mama, I need you and Dad to come to Chicago Memorial. Right now." "Michael? What's wrong?" He stared at the birthmark, afraid to hope, but unable to stop himself. "I found her, Mama. At least, I think I did. There's a birthmark." His mother's gasp was loud in his ear. "We're on our way. Don't move." The next hour passed in a blur. Dr. Chen ordered chest X-rays and blood tests. The antibiotics started flowing through Sarah's IV. Her fever stayed high, but at least it wasn't climbing anymore. Michael didn't leave her side, not even when the nurses came to change her into a hospital gown. They worked around the coat, understanding, somehow, that it was more than just a piece of clothing. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling words Michael couldn't understand. Once, she opened her eyes and looked right at him. "I know you," she said clearly, "from somewhere before. But that's silly, right?" Before Michael could answer, she was asleep again. A social worker appeared, asking questions Michael couldn't answer. Where did Sarah come from? Who were her foster parents? How long had she been on the streets? Give me time, he pleaded. My parents are coming. We think she might be someone we lost a long time ago. The social worker looked doubtful, but agreed to wait. Finally, Dr. Chen returned with the test results. The pneumonia is pretty severe, she said. She'll need to stay here for at least a week, and we really need to contact her guardians. I'm here, a voice called from the doorway. Michael turned to see his mother rushing in, his father right behind her. They stopped short when they saw Sarah in the hospital bed. Oh my God, his mother whispered, her hands covering her mouth. Michael pointed to the birthmark. Pooh, look, Mama. It's just like Joy's. His mother moved closer, tears streaming down her face. His father put an arm around her, his own eyes wet. Those eyes, his father said softly. Even with the fever, those are my mother's eyes. The golden flecks. Dr. Chen looked between them, understanding dawning on her face. Are you saying this child might be our daughter? Michael's mother said. Our Joy. She was stolen from this very hospital 30 years ago. The doctor's eyes widened. I remember that case. It was huge news. She turned to the social worker. We need to do a DNA test. Right away. Sarah stirred on the bed, her fever bright, eyes opening. She looked at all the people around her, confusion and fear crossing her face. Michael? She called weakly, reaching for his hand. His parents looked startled. They hadn't known he'd kept his identity from her. I'm here, he said, taking her hand. These are my parents. They've been looking for someone very special to them. Sarah's eyes drifted to Michael's mother, who was crying silently. Something flickered in her face. Recognition? Memory? Or just fever dreams? Your eyes, Sarah whispered to Michael's mother. I see them sometimes, in my dreams. Then, she was asleep again, still holding Michael's hand, still wrapped in his coat, the coat that had started everything. Dr. Chen touched Michael's shoulder. We need to draw blood for the DNA test. It'll take a few days for results. A few days. After 30 years of searching, they had to wait a few more days to know for sure. But looking at Sarah's sleeping face, at the birthmark on her hand, at those eyes that had haunted him since last night, Michael knew in his heart they'd found Joy. Now they just had to save her. The next 3 days were the longest of Michael's life. Sarah's fever finally broke on the second day, but the pneumonia left her weak and tired. She slept most of the time, still wrapped in his coat despite the warm hospital blankets. While they waited for the DNA results, Michael's security team worked with the police to investigate Sarah's past. The foster parents she'd run away from had moved to Florida, leaving no forwarding address. The adoption agency that had placed her was closed, its records sealed or destroyed. It's like someone tried to erase her history, John reported, showing Michael the files they'd found. The adoption papers look real, but there are holes. Big ones. Michael's mother barely left Sarah's room, sitting in the chair by the bed for hours, just watching her sleep. Sometimes she'd hum old lullabies, the same ones she used to sing to Joy. On the third morning, Sarah was awake and sitting up when Michael arrived at the hospital. She looked better, some color back in her cheeks. The nurses said, "You're Michael Jordan," she said, as he walked in. "The basketball player. Why didn't you tell me?" Michael sat in his usual chair beside her bed. "I wanted you to trust me for me, not because I'm famous." Sarah thought about this. "Is that why everyone's being so nice to me? Because you're important?" "No," Michael said gently. "They're being nice because we think we might know who you are." Sarah's hands clutched at the coat. "What do you mean?" Before Michael could answer, Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, holding a manila envelope. Michael's parents, who had been getting coffee, rushed into the room behind her. "The DNA results are in," Dr. Chen said. The room went silent. Sarah looked around at everyone's tense faces, confusion and fear mixing in her eyes. "What's DNA?" she asked in a small voice. Michael's mother stepped forward. "DNA is like a map of who you are, sweetheart, of who your family is." "I don't have a family," Sarah said automatically, but she didn't sound so sure anymore. Dr. Chen opened the envelope and pulled out a paper. Her hands were shaking slightly as she read it. "The test shows..." She paused, taking a deep breath. "A 99% match. Sarah is your daughter. She's Joy Jordan." Michael's mother collapsed into his father's arms, sobbing. Michael felt tears running down his own face as he looked at Sarah, at Joy, his sister, found at last. But Sarah was shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "No, that's impossible. I was left at a hospital. Nobody wanted me." "You weren't left, sweetheart," Michael's father said softly. "You were stolen, right from this hospital, 30 years ago. We've been looking for you ever since." Sarah's eyes darted between them like a trapped animal. But I'm 12. How can I be your daughter?" Dr. Chen stepped closer to the bed. "Sarah, when was the last time you saw a doctor? Had a checkup?" Sarah shrugged. "Never? The foster parents just said I was small for my age. We did some tests while you were sick," Dr. Chen explained. "Based on your bone development and other markers, you're not 12. You're closer to 14 or 15. "The foster parents must have lied about your age," John said from the doorway. "Probably to keep getting payments for a younger child. We're finding a lot of things they lied about." Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the Ituan coat around her shoulders. Michael wanted to hug her, but he knew she needed space to process this. If I'm really your daughter," she said to Michael's parents, "why do I look so young? Why am I so small?" Dr. Chen answered gently. "Malnutrition can slow growth and development. With proper care and nutrition, you'll probably have a growth spurt soon." "A nurse took you," Michael's mother said, wiping her tears. "She used fake papers to work at the hospital. She took you right from my arms, saying she needed to check your temperature. We never saw you again. Until now," Michael added softly. Sarah, Joy, looked down at her hands, at the crescent-shaped birthmark that had helped identify her. "I have dreams sometimes," she whispered, "about someone singing to me, and eyes like yours." She looked at Michael's mother. Was that real?" "I used to sing you a special lullaby," Michael's mother said. Would you like to hear it?" Sarah nodded slowly. As their mother began to sing softly, Michael saw recognition flicker in Sarah's eyes. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I remember," she breathed. "I remember that song." Michael's mother moved to the bed, arms outstretched but waiting for permission. After a long moment, Sarah leaned forward into her embrace. "My baby." "There," Mother whispered. "My joy." The room was full of tears now. Happy tears, healing tears. Even Dr. Chen was wiping her eyes. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice muffled against their mother's shoulder. "Now you come home," Michael's father said. "If you want to." Sarah pulled back, looking scared again. "But what if I'm not what you wanted? What if I'm not good enough?" "Impossible," Michael said firmly. "You're our joy. You're perfect, exactly as you are." "But I've been living on the streets," Sarah protested. "I don't know how to be joy." "You don't have to be anything but yourself," their mother assured her. "We'll figure it out together. We have time now." Sarah looked down at the coat she still wore. "Is that why this felt so special? Because somehow I knew?" Michael smiled through his tears. "Maybe. Or maybe it was just meant to bring us together." "There will be press attention," John warned from the door. "Once this gets out, we'll protect her," Michael said firmly. "She's had enough people trying to control her life." Sarah, Joy, looked around at her newfound family, her eyes full of wonder and fear and hope. Can I still be Sarah sometimes?" she asked hesitantly. "Until I get used to being Joy." "You can be whoever you need to be, sweetheart," their mother said. "We're just happy to have your back." Outside the hospital window, snow was falling again, just like the night Michael had given his coat to a shivering girl. He hadn't known then that he was giving it to his sister, but something in his heart had recognized her. Now, watching Sarah, Joy, being held by their mother, Michael knew their family's 30-year winter was finally ending. Spring was coming, at last. 1 week later, Sarah Joy, as everyone had started calling her, respecting her wish to keep both names, stood in the entrance of Michael's mansion, still wearing his coat despite the warmth inside. "This is where you live?" she asked, eyes wide as she took in the huge space. "This is where we live," Michael corrected gently. "At least until Mom and Dad finish getting your room ready at their house." The past week had been a whirlwind. Once the doctors cleared Sarah Joy to leave the hospital, the police had moved quickly to arrest her former foster parents in Florida. The investigation revealed a shocking truth. The nurse who had stolen her had been working with an illegal adoption ring. "They took lots of babies," Detective Martinez had explained. "But yours was the only one from this hospital." The nurse, her real name was Helen Cooper. She saw the news about Michael Jordan's sister and thought she could get more money for you. The adoption ring was long gone now, but Helen Cooper was still alive. They found her in a nursing home in Arizona, where she finally confessed to everything. "I'm sorry," she'd written in a letter to the family. "I was young and greedy. I told myself the babies would have better lives with rich families who could pay for them. I was wrong." Sarah Joy hadn't wanted to read the letter. "The past is the past," she'd said. "I want to focus on now." Now meant learning to be part of a family again. It meant proper meals and warm beds and people who worried if she coughed. It meant cameras following them everywhere as the media went crazy over the story. Michael Jordan's missing sister found after 30 years. But Michael kept the press away, just as he'd promised. His security team made sure Sarah Joy could heal and adjust in peace. "Want to see your room?" he asked, picking up her small backpack. Everything she owned from her life on the streets. Sarah Joy nodded, following him up the grand staircase. Michael had spent the past week getting the room ready, letting their mother help decorate it. When he opened the door, Sarah Joy gasped. The room was perfect for a teenager finding herself. Not too childish, not too grown up. The walls were a soft blue like a spring sky. A window seat looked out over the garden. Bookshelves held both children's classics and young adult novels, letting her choose what felt right. "The closet's full of clothes," Michael said, "but we can get anything else you want." Sarah Joy walked to the bed, touching the soft comforter. "I've never had my own bed before, not a real one." "Well, This one's all yours." Michael watched as she explored the room, opening drawers and peeking in the bathroom. "Mom wanted to fill it with baby pictures, but I thought that might be too much right now." "Thanks," she said quietly. Then she spotted something on the dresser and froze. It was a coat rack, specially made to hold just one coat. His coat, the one that had brought them together. "I thought you might want to keep it. Safe," Michael explained. "Even when you don't need it anymore." Sarah Joy touched the coat she was wearing, the original one from that cold night. Slowly, carefully, she took it off and hung it on the rack. "I don't need it right now," she said, "but maybe sometimes, when things feel scary." "Whenever you want," Michael assured her. "It's yours forever." She turned to him then, and for the first time since the hospital, she initiated a hug. Michael held his sister gently, still amazed that she was real, that she was here. "I have something for you too," she said, pulling back. From her backpack, she took out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a basketball game ticket from years ago, one of Michael's games. The paper was worn thin from being folded and unfolded many times. "I found it in the library one day," she explained. "I used to look at your picture and make up stories about having a family like yours. I didn't know. I never dreamed." Michael took the ticket carefully, his vision blurring with tears. All those years he'd played basketball hoping to help find his sister, and she'd been holding on to this piece of him without knowing why. A knock at the door made them both turn. Their parents stood there, smiling through their own tears. "Ready for your first family dinner?" their mother asked. Sarah Joy looked nervous. "I don't know how. I've never—" "Hey," Michael said softly. "Remember what we talked about? No pressure. We'll figure it out together." They walked downstairs as a family. In the dining room, Marcus from the shelter was waiting with his own surprise. He'd been adopted by one of Michael's teammates after his situation came to light. "Told you he was a good guy," Marcus said to Sarah Joy, grinning. As they sat down to eat, Michael watched his sister take everything in: the fancy plates, the warm food, the love surrounding her. She was still small for her age, still cautious, still healing. But she was home. Later that night, passing her room, Michael heard their mother's voice singing that special lullaby. He peeked in to see Sarah Joy curled up in her new bed, finally sleeping without the coat. But the coat hung nearby, a reminder of that cold night when a brother's kindness and a sister's trust broke through 30 years of winter. Some people called it a miracle. Others called it fate. Michael just called it love. Because sometimes love looks like a coat given to a stranger. Sometimes it looks like a ticket saved for no reason. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it looks like a family finding its missing piece on a snowy Chicago night. Sarah Joy Jordan was finally home, and spring had never felt so warm. And that's how a single coat on a cold Chicago night brought a family back together after 30 years apart. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming true stories like this one. Stay warm, stay kind, and remember, sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest acts of kindness.